War of the Worlds. The War of the Worlds. 11. At the Window.
Okay, so welcome back for chapter 11 then. This is, as I say, a strange chapter because it's half and half. Last year when we started this one, we got as far as page 53 and then we had to go on lockdown. So it picks up from the very first of my home recordings for this book, from page 53. But I'll get through these first 3.5 pages now, and then I'll hand back over to my 2020 self back in March of 2020. So I apologise if the audio changes between now and then. It probably will do because my first setup was fairly primitive, as you can imagine. It got better as we went into lockdown, but the early ones were fairly basic, so it might not be quite as clear, but hopefully it'll be okay. Anyway, At the Window, fairly sort of unsuggestive title, really, isn't it? Not quite as dramatic as the previous ones. A bit of a sense of calm now after the chaos of the last chapter. So you find the rhythm of the novel is one that tends to go sort of calm then chaos, and this sort of rolling motion of tension and then release, which is sort of how most human responses are and experiences are, really. So let's have a look at this one.
I have already said that my storms of emotion have a trick of exhausting themselves. After a time I discovered that I was cold and wet, and with little pools of water about me on the stair carpet. I got up, almost mechanically, went into the dining room and drank some whiskey, and then I was moved to change my clothes. After I had done that, I went upstairs to my study, but why I did so I do not know. The window of my study looks over the trees and the railway towards Horsell Common. In the hurry of our departure, this window had been left open. The passage was dark, and by contrast with the picture of the window frame enclosed, the side of the room seemed impenetrably dark. I stopped short in the doorway. The thunderstorm had passed. The towers of the Oriental College and the pine trees about it had gone, and very far away, lit by a vivid red glare, the common about the sandpits was visible. Across the light, huge black shapes, grotesque and strange, moved busily to and fro.
A bit more of this withholding information there. We have these huge black shapes, grotesque and strange. Hendiadys also, I think, in the words grotesque and strange there. We're not given details. We're just these huge black shapes. They're frightening because they're big, but they're mysterious because of they're not lit. We can't see what they're doing or what they are, but we know they're threatening. So it's, again, more threat, more danger, without giving us too much description.
It seemed indeed as if the whole country in that direction was on fire. A broad hillside set with minute tongues of flame, swaying and writhing with the gusts of the dying storm, and throwing a red reflection upon the cloud scud above.
You'll have noticed the personification there, I imagine, of dying storm. Again, this is a sense that, yes, the storm has finished, the storm has passed, and in the calm, he can see the destruction left by the Martians so far. But the fact that the storm itself has died is also pathetic fallacy, because it's suggesting that even the weather has been kind of destroyed by the Martians.
Every now and then, a haze of smoke from some nearer conflagration drove across the window and hid the Martian shapes. I could not see what they were doing, nor the clear form of them, nor recognize the black objects they were busied upon. Neither could I see the nearer fire, though the reflections of it danced on the wall and ceiling of my study. A sharp, resinous tang of burning was in the air.
So more personification there with this dancing of the fire and the reflections dancing on the wall and the ceilings of his study as it looks out across the road and across to Horsell Common. And sorry, I lost my place there. And also the use of smell, the sharp resinous tang of burning was in the air. Now this is the olfactory senses, which means the sense of smell. So I'll spell that word for you. It's the word factory with O-L before it. So O-L-F-A-C-T-O-R-Y. And olfactory senses simply mean the sense of smell. So you could say here that Wells uses the olfactory senses to immerse the reader in the world of the narrative, and so that we can smell, as the narrator smells, this unpleasant smell of destruction which has been left by the Martians.
I closed the door noiselessly and crept towards the window. As I did so, the view opened out until, on the one hand, it reached the houses about Woking Station, and on the other, to the charred and blackened pine woods of Byfleet. There was a light down below the hill, on the railway, near the arch. And several of the houses along the Maybury Road and the streets near the station were glowing ruins. The light upon the railway puzzled me at first. There were a black heap and a vivid glare, and to the right of that, a row of yellow oblongs. Then I perceived this was a wrecked train. The forepart smashed and on fire, the hinder carriages still upon the rails.
And this is another cataleptic reference back to the use of trains. You remember from the previous chapters where the trains were a reassuring sound and sight to the narrator, because he knows it means normality. And so here, to see a train wrecked and smashed and on fire is even more disturbing, because that signifies lack of order and lack of normality. So this motif we've had before of a train running past his house representing normality, clearly here is being subverted and being changed, and it's suggestive. Again, it's the same technique. It's not telling us how it happened. It's just showing us the chaos. We're not really allowed to see the Martians much or what they actually do. We just get to see the devastation afterwards, which shows us how powerful they are without necessarily describing them too much. Because you can't. How could you describe the Martians over a number of pages and keep the suspense and keep the tension? You couldn't. As soon as you've described the things, you've kind of shown all your cards. Then there's not much left to do. Then so he's holding back with the description of the Martians, because it's far more frightening to look at the wreckage and sort of let our imaginations do the work than it is to actually describe them in his own words.
Between these three main centres of light, the houses, the train, and the burning country towards Chobham, stretched irregular patches of dark country, broken here and there by intervals of dimly glowing and smoking ground. It was the strangest spectacle, that black expanse set with fire. It reminded me, more than anything else, of the potteries at night.
So here we're given this quite devastating description of the destruction that lays around the blackened land, the blackened buildings, but also the fire and the burning and the glowing all around, and this constant smoke, so much so that it's compared to what he calls the potteries, which is the areas of the Midlands where known for their factories in the late Victorian period, where H.G. Wells himself spent some time. You can check the notes in the appendices at the back of the book if that helps, but that's what the potteries refer to. But the point here is just he looks out upon a whole area of absolute destruction, which is so heartbreaking for him, because this is his rural, that word bucolic again, that sort of area of beauty, and his home, and it's been wrecked and ruined by the Martians.
At first I could distinguish no people at all, though I peered intently for them. Later I saw against the light of Woking Station a number of black figures, hurrying one after the other across the line. And this was the little world in which I had been living securely for years. This fiery chaos. What had happened in the last 7 hours, I still did not know. Nor did I know, though I was beginning to guess, the relation between these mechanical colossi and the sluggish lumps I had seen disgorged from the cylinder.
So there we've got the perspective again, that at that point he still didn't know what had happened in the last 7 hours. He learns this in the time between when it happened and him writing this narrative. But at that time, he didn't know, and nor did he know, although he was beginning to guess, the relationship between those mechanical colossi and the sluggish lumps I'd seen disgorged from the cylinder. And essentially what it is that the sluggish lumps had climbed into the mechanical machines and were then driving them. So they overcame the power of gravity on Earth and the fact they couldn't really move very well themselves with these mechanical machines that they brought with them to be able to do the heavy lifting and the work, driven by the Martians inside them, like a tank, which again didn't exist when he was writing this. He's predicted something which didn't exist. He refers to them as mechanical colossi, and colossi is a plural. It's the Latin plural for something big. And so again, by using that Latinate noun there, it makes us think of myths and legends and things that are things that are sort of terrifying machines and terrifying monsters, a bit like we mentioned a few chapters back with the it wasn't this book, wasn't it? The Gorgon, the Medusa, the legend of Medusa. So he's not afraid of drawing on Greek mythology to help his story and help create that fear.
With a queer feeling of impersonal interest, I turned my desk chair to the window, sat down, and stared at the blackened country, and particularly at the 3 gigantic black things that were going to and fro in the glare about the sandpits. They seemed amazingly busy. I began to ask myself what they could be. Were they intelligent mechanisms? Such a thing I felt was impossible. Or did a Martian sit within each, ruling, directing, using, much as man's brain sits and rules his body? I began to compare the things to human machines, to ask myself, for the first time in my life, how an ironclad or a steam engine would seem to an intelligent lower animal.
And that word there, ironclad, if you looked at the appendices, you'll notice that it means a ship, a warship that's literally clad or covered with strong iron or steel to protect it against artillery. And interesting there, he again draws on zoomorphism really to think about how these man-made things, such as a steam engine, would seem to an intelligently lower animal. So, an intelligent lower animal, so something less than humanity, but something, aware enough to look at its surroundings. Let's say, I don't know, a dog or something. How it would seem, how a steam engine would first seem to a dog. And he's saying that's the effect, how he felt, like a lower species looking at this amazing machine, which may have a Martian inside it driving it along. He wasn't sure, but it's that to his rational mind that seemed to make sense, and of course it makes sense to us too.
The storm had left the sky clear, and over the smoke of the burning land, a little fading pinpoint of Mars was dropping into the west, when a soldier came into my garden. I heard a light scraping at the fence, and, rousing myself from the lethargy that had fallen upon me, I looked down and saw him, dimly, clambering over the palings. At the sight of another human being, my torpor passed, and I leant out of the window eagerly. "Sst," said I, in a whisper. He stopped astride the fence in doubt. Then he came over and across the lawn to the corner of the house. He bent down and stepped softly. "Who's here?" he said, also whispering, standing under the window and peering up. "Where are you going?" I asked. "God knows." "Are you trying to hide?" "That's it." "Come into the house," I said. I went down and fastened the door and let him in, and locked the door again. I could not see his face. He was hatless, and his coat was unbuttoned.
So here we've got more dialogue, and the use of these short sentences is that stichomythia again. So you've got short sentences. It shows the awkwardness between the two of them. It shows the desperation of these two men as they try and help each other, but also not necessarily trust each other. So you've got you can call this dialogue, because it is. If it was a play, you'd call it dialogue. You can also call it a dyadic exchange. So D-I-A-D-I-C, dyadic exchange, just means a conversation between two people. It means exactly the same thing, but that's the technical term if you want to use that, but you don't have to. More importantly is the structural technique of stickomythia, which means those short one-line responses to each other, so rapid pace conversation, showing the awkwardness and the lack of trust between the two of them. So that's STICHOMYTHIA. And if you notice the questions as well from the narrator, where are you going? Are you trying to hide? Now, the technical term there is interrogatives. So rather than, you could say questions, but they're also called interrogatives. INTERROGATIVES, interrogatives. And that shows that sort of lack of understanding. You know, what's happening here? He's trying to find information. The soldier replies in his short, abrupt answers. And we get this awkwardness between the two of them. But he wants to help him, so he lets him in.
My God, he said, as I drew him in. What has happened? I asked. What hasn't? In the obscurity, I could see he made a gesture of despair. They wiped us out. Simply wiped us out. He repeated again and again.
That use of the word they there is again the use of deixis, D-E-I-X-I-S, and it refers to these others. They're not being named as Martians yet, they're just being called they or them, and it adds to that uncertainty and that threat that they pose because they're not really given a name yet. And of course with a name comes familiarity, but they've not got that yet. They're just these others, these strangers.
He followed me, almost mechanically, into the dining room. Take some whiskey, I said, pouring out a stiff dose. He drank it. Then abruptly he sat down before the table, put his head on his arms, and began to sob and weep like a little boy, in a perfect passion of emotion, while I, with a curious forgetfulness of my own recent despair, stood beside him, wondering.
So we've got the hendiadys there of sobbing and weeping, sob and weep like a little boy. Again, and also combined with the simile there, like a little boy. This is a soldier. This is someone who's being in the front line attacking these things, and they've wiped them out, is what we're told. And it's affected him so greatly that they've been wiped out. Even their best artillery has been wiped out in so quickly that he thinks there's no hope left, and he's reduced to tears. And so if the military are reduced to tears, that's even more frightening for the narrator and more frightening for us as the reader, because their best hope, humanity's best hopes of wiping these things out and defending itself, as being threatened and has been, as he says, wiped out.
It was a long time before he could steady his nerves to answer my questions. And then he answered, perplexingly and brokenly. He was a driver in the artillery, and had only come into action about 7. At that time, firing was going on across the common, and it was said the first party of Martians were crawling slowly towards their second cylinder under cover of a metal shield. Later, this shield staggered up on tripod legs and became the first of the fighting machines I had seen. The gun he drove had been unlimbered near Horsell in order to command the sandpits, and its arrival it was that had precipitated the action. As the limber gunners went to the rear, his horse trod in a rabbit hole and came down, throwing him into a depression of the ground. At the same moment, the gun exploded behind him. The ammunition blew up, there was fire all about him, and he found himself lying under a heap of charred dead men and dead horses.
So there you've got this asyndetic list of chaos, haven't you, there, from the fact that the gun exploded, the ammunition blew up, there was fire all about him, and he found himself lying under a heap of charred dead men and dead horses. So this asyndetic list of chaos that the soldier found himself in because his horse fell down a rabbit hole and caused this explosion to happen and the gun to go off and of course caused the that drew attention to itself for the Martians to then attack them.
"I lay still," he said, "scared out of my wits, with the forequarter of a horse atop of me. We'd been wiped out, and the smell, good God, it's like burnt meat. I was hurt across the back by the fall of the horse, and there I had to lie until I felt better, just like parade it had been a minute before. Then stumble, bang, swish."
So there we've got the simile, like burnt meat. The smell, good God, like burnt meat. He's using quite a blasphemous term as well to say good God is a sort of blasphemous thing to do, especially in those days. Bearing in mind it was the late Victorian period. So he clearly is affected and shocked by what's happened to him. And he'd been hurt. And towards the end of that paragraph, you've got the onomatopoeia of bang and swish. Presumably the swish is the swish of the heat ray, the swish of the attack, so the stumble, bang of the explosion. Those the triadic structure, those three things, stumble, bang and swish, all presented to us in an asyndetic list as well, and onomatopoeic as well. So lots of things happening in those last three words particularly. And so I'll leave you there. This is the end of the 2021 commentary. I'm going to let the old 2021 take over now from March, back in 2020 at the start of the first lockdown. So if I apologise for any change in audio quality, but hopefully it'll be okay. And I'll see you again. I'll see you again in the future, won't I? Bye for now.
"Wiped out," he said. He had hid under the dead horse for a long time, peeping out furtively across the common. The Cardigan men had tried a rush, in skirmishing order, at the pit, simply to be swept out of existence. Then the monster had risen to its feet, and had begun to walk leisurely to and fro, across the common, among the few fugitives. With its head-like hood, turning about exactly like the head of a cowled human being.
Okay, so we've got a simile there, exactly like the head of a cowled human being. And a cowl is like a metal covering that goes over something. You often find them on chimneys. So by using a simile, which is a language point, H.G. Wells is making it more familiar and increasing the dramatic tension as the reader can imagine what these creatures look like. So suddenly they're now moving in a way that we recognise as human.
A kind of arm carried a complicated metallic case, about which green flashes scintillated, and out of the funnel of this there smote the heat ray. In a few minutes there was, so far as the soldier could see, not a living thing left upon the common.
So there we've got an example of litotes, not a living thing left upon the common. He could have said everything was dead, but he's done it in reverse and said not a living thing left on the common. So it's litotes, which is another language point, Litotes.
And every bush and tree upon it that was not already a blackened skeleton was burning.
So we've got Hendiadys there, with the things being burnt, but also a metaphor of a skeleton as well. So again, in the semantic field of death, which again reinforces how frightening these creatures are.
The hussars had been on the road beyond the curvature of the ground, and he saw nothing of them. He heard the Maxims rattle for a time, and then become still.
So those Maxims again, just a reminder of those new technology, new weapons that were created around 1894, so very recently, only 4 years old when the book was written, and probably only 3 years old when the book was actually being written. So new technology, even the best technology the British military had at the time, wasn't enough to stop the Martians.
The giant saved Woking Station and its cluster of houses until the last. Then, in a moment, the heat ray was brought to bear, and the town became a heap of fiery ruins. Then this thing shot off the heat ray, and turning its back upon the artilleryman, began to waddle away towards the smouldering pine woods that sheltered the second cylinder. As it did so, a second glittering titan built itself up out of the pit.
So that metaphor of glittery titan, there, sort of a mythical reference there to Greek gods, and again reinforcing the size of the thing, but also the power. It sort of draws upon that mythical sense of power that these Martians have. But glittery as well is an interesting adjective to use. So slightly oxymoronic. This is all language points here, because the Titans, you wouldn't expect them to be glittery, so it's just an odd description, but it makes us think about them in a different way.
The second monster followed the first, and at that the artilleryman began to crawl, very cautiously, across the hot heather ash towards Horsell.
Just worth saying as well there, we've got the incrementum of more of these Titans, more of these Martian machines. So there's a sense of incrementum, which is a structural technique that creates that dramatic tension.
He managed to get alive into the ditch by the side of the road, and so escaped to Woking. There his story became ejaculatory.
So that's a word we don't hear too often these days, particularly not with in a narrative sense, but it just means an outburst of noise. So at this point, the artilleryman is sort of losing sense of reason, and he's sort of speaking in sudden short bursts and not making a great deal of sense.
The place was impassable. It seems there were a few people alive there, frantic for the most part, and many burnt and scalded. He was turned aside by the fire and hid among some scorching heaps of broken wall as one of the Martian giants returned. He saw this one pursue a man, catch him up in one of its steely tentacles, and knock his head against the trunk of a pine tree. At last, after nightfall, the artillerymen made a rush for it and got over the railway embankment. Since then he had been skulking along towards Maybury, in the hope of getting out of danger Londonward.
That reference to the tentacles there, the steely tentacles, just reminds us back to chapter 1 or chapter 2 when we first see the tentacles, and we now realise that these are now mobile, and the things that we saw before are now moving and attacking people, and even killing somebody against a tree.
People were hiding in trenches and cellars, and many of the survivors had made off towards Woking village and Send. He had been consumed with thirst until he found one of the water mains near the railway arch smashed, and the water bubbling out like a spring upon the road. That was the story I got from him, bit by bit. He grew calmer, telling me, and trying to make me see the things he had seen.
So here we've got an interesting blend of narrative devices. We've got the direct speech from the artilleryman, the actual words that he says that are in speech marks, but we also have the indirect or reported speech, where we're getting a sense from the narrator of what the artilleryman has said. So actually by getting both types of speech, Wells creates a more convincing account of this being real and authentic. So by blending indirect direct speech and reported speech.
He had eaten no food since midday, he told me, early in his narrative.
It's interesting that he uses the word narrative itself, which means to tell a story, doesn't it? So by referring to the artilleryman's narrative, it's that sense of more perspectives, more people. We've heard different kinds of people giving their narratives in this chapter.
And I found some mutton and bread in the pantry and brought it into the room. We lit no lamp for fear of attracting the Martians, and ever and again our hands touched upon meat or bread. As he talked, things about us came darkly out of the darkness, and the trampled bushes and broken rose trees outside the window grew distinct. It would seem that a number of men or animals had rushed across the lawn. I began to see his face, blackened and haggard, as no doubt mine was also.
So Hendiadys there of blackened and haggard, both creating the same effect of being really affected by this battle and dirty from the fighting and the heat as well.
When we had finished eating, we went softly upstairs to my study, and I looked again out of the open window. In one night the valley had become a valley of ashes.
So for our purposes, it's a simple metaphor, a valley of ashes, representing the burnt debris that's been left over. But interesting that that's the title of one of the chapters in the Great Gatsby novel, which was not written until much later, the 1920s. Well, not that much later, but 1920s, but taken by F. Scott Fitzgerald there as a title for a chapter.
The fires had dwindled now. Where flames had been, there were now streamers of smoke. But the countless ruins of shattered and gutted houses, and blasted and blackened trees that the night had hidden, stood out now, gaunt and terrible in the pitiless light of dawn.
So there's more Hendiadys, again, 2 examples of Hendiadys there, just to reinforce how bleak and barren the area is after the Martians have been there.
Yet here and there, some objects had had the luck to escape. A white railway signal here, the end of a greenhouse there, white and fresh amid the wreckage. Never before in the history of warfare had destruction been so indiscriminate and so universal. And shining with the growing light of the east, 3 of the metallic giants stood about the pit.
So more incrementum there, with now 3 Martians looking over the area. First we had 1, then 2, and now we've got 3. Incrementum, which is a structural technique.
Their cowls rotating, as though they were surveying the desolation they had made. It seemed to me that the pit had been enlarged, and ever and again puffs of vivid green vapour streamed up out of it, towards the brightening dawn. Streamed up, whirled, broke, and vanished. Beyond were the pillars of fire about Chobham. They became pillars of bloodshot smoke at the first touch of day.
So those pillars of bloodshot smoke, pillars of fire, pillars of flame, these are metaphors as well. But just one final point on the chapter there, the use of pathetic fallacy. Because even though it's dawn, the start of a new day, when things normally might be quite cheerful and optimistic, here it's not. It's really bleak because the Martians have completely, as he said, indiscriminately killed and destroyed everything around on Horsell Common. So even though it's a new day, it's really, really bleak, and therefore more frightening actually than if it had been in the middle of the night. It's sort of the start of a new day and yet still really terrible.